Hi, I'm Jen Taylor. Whoa, and I'm
Whoa.
loud.
Hello.
Many of you already knew that. I'm Jen Taylor. I'm head of product here at Cloudflare, and I'm really excited to be joined today by Eric Gundersen, who's the CEO of Mapbox, and Shawna Wolverton, who's the chief product officer at Planet, to talk about location. Never mattered more before. Now, we have to acknowledge the bird in the room. Shawna.
It's sort of cheating, my job.
It is.
I get to bring satellites wherever I go.
Do you have a little leash for the satellite?
I do have a little case.
Yeah.
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 When you travel with it, it's fun.
Yeah.
It's a weapon.
Yeah.
So you have to have some explaining to do going through security with a satellite. Yeah.
Talk with us a little bit about what you're doing with the satellites today, other than bringing them to speaking engagements.
So we have built and launched 298 satellites. So Planet operates the world's largest constellation of commercial satellites. And what we're doing is we're imaging the entire Earth every day. Because if you can see the world in a whole new way, we think there's tremendous insight and action to take when you understand where things are in the world and what's happening there.
Got it. Got it. So that's a lot of images.
It's a lot. Yeah, we have over 800 images of every place on Earth over the last 3 years.
That is crazy. Mm-hmm. So, Eric, I know one of the things you've been thinking a lot about is really kind of stitching together the fabric of location. Can you talk a little bit about how you've thought about that and how you've approached that problem?
Yeah, look, when we first got started, I was actually started in DC, and we were working on election monitoring and public health work, and we had these opportunities to help out some of these agencies, whether it's UN or World Bank, the State Department, try to have context. And like you said, location's more important now than ever. Well, it's always been important. It's just changing a lot now. So back in first time to Afghanistan was in 2009, and I was there to map an election. And you landed, and at the time, literally the map itself was just a cross street of two major highways. You had Ring Road and Jalalabad Road coming up from the south. And I was like, well, how are you going to map an election here if you don't have a map? And so bit by bit, we've been not only making a map, but making the APIs and the tech to make it really easy for developers and enterprise to put location and stuff into their apps. So the cool part is there's a lot more data now. And since I have to make the map from all these different sets of data, where there's data coming off the cell phone every time somebody's using an app with Mapbox in it, we're collecting anonymous aggregated data back. So we have over 400 million monthly active users. That's helping us see the road network, roads, traffic, but also the imagery coming back. And we're at this moment in time where we're able to not just make our own data and index a lot of data from different open communities, but buy a lot of data. And the more sensors coming on, the richer the map is.
So, I mean, here we are at the Internet Summit, and we're talking about location, which at some level might sound a little obscure, right? Because we're talking about the Internet. It's this sort of virtual thing, and location is theoretically a very physical thing. But how do you guys see those things coming together? Why is location so important on the Internet?
I mean, this is your question, Eric.
It is part of. I mean, just open up your phones, right? Look at the start screen. How many of those apps are adding context via location? And then back when we started, the map was a canvas to communicate about something. The reality now is so much of that power of location is starting to fade into the background. Being able to know exactly where you are, all the way down. Pick an industry in terms of logistics. I mean, if I can get more things in more cars faster, my God, you change the margins of an entire industry. Next thing you know, that industry is not even ride hailing. You got scooters. You start needing all sorts of different modality classifiers for how you move. So this is on a fundamental level, this is about changing how people and goods all move, and all of that is now happening because we're connected. And
and it's interesting, because you kind of talk about being kind of a sensor consumer, and Shawna, you're a sensor producer.
Sensor producer.
Yeah. How do you think about this challenge from the sensor producer part of the problem?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're adorable, my satellites, but really they're just my data center in the sky.
Yeah.
A really fun, cool data center with a rocket that launches. That's a good part. But at the end of the day, what's important is the interesting data that comes off of the sensors, and the kind of sensors that are in space as well as on the ground today, when those things kind of come together and you can understand the dimensionality of any place on Earth. So not only do you know where you are, you know all of the different kinds of things that are happening about that space. You bring together places, you bring together the kinds of things you can find through machine learning and computer vision and satellite imagery. It paints a tremendous picture of sort of every place on Earth, which is incredibly powerful.
And you need a lot of data sources to be able to have that context. I mean, if you, just go open up Snapchat, pull out, look at that map. I think on average, one of our maps is made from over 130 different sources of data, whether those are roads or understanding the part classification, which we analyze from satellite imagery, because you can detect from bands on that, all the way down to the visual component of the imagery, right? Because sometimes you actually don't even need to see it. You just want to know the context of like, okay, this is a place, this is water, this is my perfect beach line here. Right, and it's all this data constantly feeding back. I mean, you all have some incredible stats on how often the world's changing. But it's that live feedback loop that I think's really changed the mapping space for a lot of us.
Absolutely, and I think when you think about all of the data that we have, really, I call it sort of drowning in pixels, right? We need the kinds of tools you need to gain the insight. Really, there's a whole number of industries that can be really served by the information that comes from all of these sensors, but we need to democratize the access to it. We need to pull what's interesting out of all of this data that's coming from all of these sensors and help customers make sense of it.
One of the things you both sort of touched on is just the sheer volume of data and being able to kind of aggregate and stitch together the data and the processing of the data. Like, how do you think about doing that? It's a lot.
It's a lot.
It's a lot.
Yeah, we bring down 6 terabytes of data a day from the satellites. And thankfully, the Earth is 50% cloudy every day, so we don't bother bringing those down. A big fat image of clouds turns out not to be very interesting to too many people. So yeah, it is a tremendous kind of data pipeline that we operate to bring down that kind of data and to process it. It's really intensive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, to add to that specifically on the satellite side, many of us in this room are working with big sets of data, and those big sets of data are changing in a timely manner. But the sheer size, like nobody talks about how fat this data is, and to be able to work with large sets of data at volume and that are heavy to transport, it's crazy. It's really complicated to move this stuff around to do processing.
Yeah, I mean, in the beginning of Planet, we were making deliveries by shipping hard drives. Wow.
Yeah. No, we've also, our first push up of imagery was FedEx was our API.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
And the honest part is, no matter how much faster this stuff gets, there's still just some fundamental constraints. Now, I would say the biggest change is probably in the last 2 years, where a lot of our data processing now is truly happening on the edge. So 3 months ago, we partnered with ARM and launched our Vision SDK, which is instead of just making maps from GPS sensor data, you can actually turn on the camera now, and on the device, you're able to do the classification, segmentation, and detection directly on the chipset. So instead of putting hundreds of thousands of dollars of equipment in the trunk of the car to be able to go out mapping, what can you do by empowering other developers to make interfaces through the phone or through really cheap hardware? And for us to be able to process that amount of data on the edge and then just pass up the change pieces, pass up the stuff, I think that's where things are about to get interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's really being able to run a diff on a visual file would be really cool. I'm going to throw that out to the audience so you can put that together by the end of the day. Yeah. So it's a vast amount of data, and I think of location as incredibly powerful. I mean, you talked about the notion of mapping an election. People talk about planting crops and stuff like that. Location is incredibly powerful substrate for just humans and the way that we engage in the world. And I think one of the things that's been really interesting in looking at the work that both of your organizations have done is really kind of how you've been able to aggregate and democratize that data. Can you talk a little bit about how you think about that kind of location data and the access to that data?
Yeah, I mean, for us, there's just tremendous insight for people doing science, and we have a fantastic relationship with the sort of academic community that really is bringing the kinds of climate change insights that are happening across the world. We have a whole bunch of people who use our Arctic data to really understand what's happening in that region with devastating consequences, and really be able to use kind of the information that's in the satellites to really change policy and change decision making.
And look, 10 years ago when someone would say, well, what are your plans to democratize some of this data, a lot of people were talking about opening data up. And US government has incredibly progressive open data policy, as many folks here know. This stuff is being put out in public domain. But that's only the first step. You have to make it accessible. You have to make it usable. So just look at Florence coming through on the hurricane side. When right after a disaster, NOAA's the first folks to fly, and they use our programmatic upload API, and you can upload up to 10 gig geotiffs and process it on the fly, and they expose that to everybody. Another partner, EagleView, the largest fly company in the U.S., which is flying at like now downwards of like 3 centimeter data. They'll go out after the insurance, and they partnered with Allstate, and we're able to put that data up, process it, and expose it via an API. So now this data is literally in the iPads of insurance adjusters. Oh, and by the way, it's already been processed to detect where the storm paths went to look for fraud. And guess what? If you're already in a storm path area and you're reporting something, your claim gets put to the top, so they're actually able to get the money out to the people whose property was actually damaged faster while reducing fraud. I mean, that's an interesting point in terms of democratizing by making this stuff accessible, and that all comes down to an API processing piece.
Right. You don't need a geospatial expert to get a score on your iPad that says probably roof damaged, and that's really, I think, to me, the really interesting thing, and the huge reason I'm at Planet, is that idea that you could take something that was traditionally the hands of specialists and with special tools, or even you didn't have imagery. I mean, so much of the imagery in the world was in governments. I mean, it's in our lifetime. Speaking of governments, satellite imagery was shot out the back of satellites and caught by planes. Right? There's nets were how we were getting imagery. So this idea now that not only do governments have access to data, and not just the US government, one of the kind of core foundational policies of Planet is that our imagery is accessible to everyone. And so we really think that the more people who have information, the more secure the world is.
And of course, there's always this inherent tension when we talk about data and access and stuff like that, and securing it at the same time, sort of the notion of privacy. And how do you guys think about that when you think about the sort of the permutation of global sensors, many of which most people aren't even aware are happening?
Yeah, it's journalists really like to ask us about privacy when you tell them you're imaging the entire Earth every day. Sensors come in various degrees. Our sensors are primarily 3 meters, which means every pixel on your screen is 3 meters on the ground. So people don't usually show up there. So we get to sort of ameliorate a lot of privacy concerns. But yes, I mean, I think it is a critical part of what we're doing, and as commercial space gets closer and closer to the ability to do some identifying things, I think there are big questions the industry is going to have to answer. And
just put that in perspective, there's this, it's a great new book called Never Lost Again. And the CMO of Keyhole, the company that Google would buy to start their mapping initiative, basically tells the behind-the-scenes stories of what this was like getting up. And the first time that Keyhole, or in this case now Google Earth, went live, people started zooming into, I forget what the resolution of the imagery exactly was. I think it was some open data from NASA. And they start getting calls like, wait, everybody can see my property now? And that, I mean, that's just over 10 years.
Yeah.
10 years ago.
Yeah.
So I think all of us are starting to have a new appreciation of what is this amount of data out there? Whether you're contributing to the data. I mean, there's a lot of talk right now about this is my data. If I'm putting it into a certain social platform, how is that being used? But the other reality is you're making data, and you're just being part of the world. Right. You're contributing to that. How is that used? I think look for us. I mean, what's on the resolution side? The resolution side is it's much more detailed. And you hear things like PII and personally identifiable information, according to the U.S. government. And then, that's like social security number, credit card number. My God, with location data, you know where you were last night. That's terrifying. Everybody building an application in this room that's doing anything with collecting location data needs to realize that while it might not be PII, it is incredibly sensitive data. And honestly, the only way, some of the security breaches in the news this week, the only way to really protect folks is to anonymize from the start. Don't actually store self-identifiable information. Trim sets the data by default, so you can't, even on aggregate, bring it back down. I mean, the fact that we don't collect, we happen to be in the business of making maps and knowing the road topology. We don't do advertising, so I don't need to target. I don't collect an ID, let alone a temp ID. And the whole idea is just to be able to get data at aggregate. So if you design a system where it's okay to lose a lot of data because you have so much data at mass, you can design something secure by default. But that's just our SDK. Everybody building an app, are you building those levels of, are you appreciative of that? I think this is going to be a conversation that all enterprises and developers are going to be having over the next couple of years.
So we're going to open up to the audience in just a couple of minutes here for questions. But I always like to ask folks in your position right here, right now, as you're surrounded by a bunch of thought leaders and people who are thinking about the future of the internet, as you think about location, what requests would you make of the people in the room?
Requests?
Yeah, what do you want them to do for you? Or do for location, or do for the industry?
I mean, I think the amazing opportunity in the room is to just let your brain think about what you could do with understanding change in the world. I mean, I think there is tremendous opportunity that we're not going to think, like Planet can't think of all of the possible use cases that there are in the world. And so be creative. We have APIs, experiment. Think about how the world can change when you know a thing you couldn't know before.
Yeah.
Everybody here should say to themselves, what part of my business is impacted by location, and what efficiency can I get from that? And I mean, you nailed it. It's like you have APIs, get creative. Like we put out the Lego building block to allow you as a business to configure an experience that transforms your efficiency and returns, and this stuff is super measurable. Taking control of that stack, that was something that nobody's ever had before. Mm-hmm. And so there's a whole new era of efficiency that you can start bringing to bear. I mean, just you start doing the math on this. Just look at a ride hailing example. You say 15 seconds here, 15 seconds here, on every single ride. Okay, well, how many more is that an hour? All right, well, wait, that's 4. Okay, now I'm at a minute. Wait, how many hours am I? Wait, can I fit another ride in? Can you imagine what you can do by fitting in another ride and a $7 meaningful average ride piece over the driver's month? That makes an impact. Mm-hmm. Go back to somebody who's doing 1 million rides a day to that company. Just say only 10% reach a threshold of adding up the seconds like that to make a meaningful addition of a person in the car. I mean, you're talking $300,000 a day. Mm. Like this stuff adds up, and people in this room have that power to do adjustments to make things much more efficient. And I think that's not just good for your business, but that's good for the planet. Well,
and I think it's as I'm sitting here talking to you guys and listening to your asks to the universe of brilliant people here, I'm just really struck by the fact how each of you have built these really robust platforms that really service this in different ways, and that really kind of, again, opening it up to the people in the room to kind of take the platforms and run with it. Yeah.
That's it exactly.
Yeah.
No, I mean, look, we came across it because we needed better tools to do our job. And again, just everybody in the room, like we were bootstrapped. We didn't take a dime of outside funding until 5 years ago this week. And is that, no, you know, it's like, wait, what tools didn't we have access to? Well, it turns out if we actually expose those via an API, a lot of other people need that same functionality.
Yeah, I mean, it's just amazing the work that both your organizations are doing. Okay, with that, I'm going to turn it over to the audience. Questions for Shawna and Eric?
Do either of you ever use vehicle license plate sighting data? There are several companies that have cameras up by the side of the road and are paying tow truck operators to record license plate data of parked cars in shopping malls all over the U.S. And they have billions of license plate sightings now. And since you can't opt out of displaying a license plate, it's a rather difficult situation for the consumer.
We are not using license plate sighting. There's an interesting analogy in global shipping. There's an AIS beacon, which is like a license plate for a boat. And it's really interesting when you bring that data together with imagery data, because it turns out people can sort of switch their license plate in the middle of the ocean and do some illegal fishing, transshipments that are embargoed. So there is interesting data when you bring those two things together, but no, we're not looking at license plate data.
Yeah, we don't either. But I mean, you're hitting on the point you just brought up. Like, by us just being out doing things that we've always done, we're now creating data trails that we didn't opt into. And I think that there's going to be some fascinating conversations about that, because we here can be having a conversation about security and best practices of collecting data, but I mean, are the right folks in the government thinking through that? Are the right security measures being brought in on that? Ultimately, where's that going to go? I think these are important questions, and I think we're just starting to get the vocabulary to have that conversation.
Other questions in the room? So I got another one coming out of license plates. What regulations do you guys have to navigate today in the work that you're doing, and how are you participating in the creation of those standards?
Yeah, we're regulated by the U.S. government. NOAA issues a license to operate in space.
I can't just fire my own rocket into space? Oh, I'm so bummed.
People have. Doesn't go well for them. No, I mean, it's amazing, actually, the liberty that we have to operate in the world. There's nothing off limits for imaging the Earth. There are some regulations. We subscribe to the kind of responsible space treaty around space junk. I had a fantastic meeting this morning about deorbiting some of our satellites responsibly. But for the most part, our satellites, because of their resolution, are not particularly highly regulated.
Yeah. And law of the land applies to us. So we have certain imagery resolution requirements in places like Israel that you can't be quite as granular. We're also fully operational and legal in China, which means we have acquired legal data through a partnership, run local infrastructure in country, and actually had our cartography signed off on by the survey department. So literally, we have an ISBN number in a book on the bottom of our maps, and so there's depending on what region you're in, there's a lot of local details to get right.
Yeah, that must be challenging, though, to think about how you can comply with those at scale, right, as you're stitching together these vast quantities of data.
Oh, so literally, we allow developers to pick the worldview that they agree with.
Yeah. And
you can then programmatically expose that worldview, depending on the geo IP, to your users.
Yeah.
And those are shifting country boundaries. Those are different name places. This is it's really raw. It's really raw stuff.
Yeah. Fascinating.
It used to be that NOAA wanted you to send them every image that you took from space. We said we would be glad to.
Yeah.
They said, no thanks, it's cool.
It's cool.
It's cool.
Yeah, it's my 800 photos of the Earth twice a day, except when it's cloudy.
It's fine.
Yeah, it's fine. It's fine. Cool. Well, thank you guys both very much. And
you.
thank you
Jen.
also to the bird.
Awesome.
Awesome. Thanks.
Hey. Good.